The atmospheric analyzer beeped 3 times, paused, then beeped 7 more in rapid succession. The universal machine language for "you're absolutely screwed." Cumber Thrace watched the readouts climb with the detached fascination of someone observing their own funeral arrangements. Sulfur dioxide levels up 40% since yesterday. Ambient radiation dancing merrily into the definitely carcinogenic range. Atmospheric pressure dropping like a stone down a well. The holoscreen beside her workstation displayed the colony's environmental threat index in cheerful crimson letters. Catastrophic. "Hey, Chem," Darius Ox's voice crackled through her helmet comm. "You seeing what I'm seeing, or did my scanner finally have that nervous breakdown it's been threatening?" Commander smiled, despite herself. 3 months ago, the Galactic Coordination Bureau had classified Zelthara 9 as borderline habitable with intensive terraforming support. 2 months ago, they downgraded it to inadvisable for prolonged settlement. Last week, the official assessment had become evacuate immediately if possible. Make peace with your deity of choice if not. The 14,000 human colonists had responded by organizing a volleyball tournament. "Confirmed," Darcy replied, adjusting her environmental suit's waste heat vents. Outside the transparent dome of Survey Station 12, Zelthara 9's sky boiled with violent chartreuse clouds. Lightning carved purple scars across the horizon every few seconds. "We're officially living on a planet that's trying to murder us." "Well, yeah. But like more than yesterday. Substantially more." Through her faceplate, Kember watched a geyser of superheated mineral vapor erupt from a fissure 200 meters distant. The plume shot 3 kilometers high before the vicious wind tore it to shreds. Beautiful in its way. Deadly in every way that mattered. Her console chimed with an incoming data burst from the colony's central hub, New Perseverance, a name that had seemed inspirational during the colony ship's journey and now felt like aggressive sarcasm. She pulled up the message from Director Tanith Voss. "Morning, team. Latest seismic data suggests that tectonic instability is accelerating. Projection models indicate we've got maybe 14 months before the continent starts properly breaking up. Also, Jarek's team reports the northern aquifer is now 37% sulfuric acid. On the bright side, medical reports that morale scores are somehow UP 6 points. Breakfast meeting at 0700 to discuss infrastructure reinforcement. Bring ideas." "Voss out," Cumber snorted. "Leave it to humanity to have improving morale on a dying world." "You catch Voss's message?" Darius asked. His servo-assisted survey rig clomped into view outside the station. A spindly construction of hydraulics and sensor arrays that made him look like a metal spider having an identity crisis. "Yeah, 14 months. 14 months!" Darius's suit performed what might have been a shrug, difficult to tell with all the equipment. "That's like 70-some-odd volleyball seasons? We're golden." The thing was, he wasn't even joking. Not entirely. Commander had seen the recreational schedules. Between reinforcing habdomes against increasingly violent pressure differentials and jury-rigging filtration systems to handle exotic atmospheric contamination, the colony had somehow maintained amateur theater productions, 3 separate book clubs and a surprisingly vicious interdepartmental chess rivalry. Her species, she'd concluded, was clinically insane. She loved that about them. "I'm heading to Site 47, Darius announced, his survey rig lurching into motion with pneumatic hisses. Seismic sensors. There went dark, probably just corrosion. But you know how Voss gets if we don't check. Copy. Watch your radiation exposure. We're already at weekly limits." "Kemp, we passed safe limits about 3 weeks after landing. At this point I'm basically glow in the dark." She watched him trudge across the cracked, mineral-stained terrain. The ground beneath Zelthara 9's settlements looked like someone had spilled every color of industrial paint across volcanic rock, then set it on fire repeatedly. Because essentially that's what had happened. The planet had been stable barely when the colony ship arrived 14 months ago. Initial surveys showed challenging but manageable conditions. Then Zelthara 9's star had belched an unexpectedly powerful solar flare, and something deep in the planet's geology had responded like a drunk fighter hearing a challenge. Dormant volcanism had awakened. Tectonic plates had started their violent breakup decades ahead of projections. The atmosphere had begun its rapid deterioration into a caustic soup. The Galactic Coordination Bureau had immediately offered evacuation support. 17 different species had volunteered ships, resources, and temporary housing. The galactic community had mobilized with admirable speed and compassion. The humans had politely declined. Not because evacuation was impossible. The GCB had been very thorough in their offers. No, humanity had collectively looked at the increasingly hostile rock they'd invested their hopes and resources into, assessed the situation with characteristic rationality, and decided, yeah, nah, we're good. A Founder pulled up the engineering reports while monitoring Darius's progress. The colony's response to impending geological apocalypse had been characteristically human. They'd started building better. New Perseverance's main dome, originally rated for standard atmospheric pressure variance, had been reinforced 3 times. The structural engineers had borrowed techniques from deep-sea submarine construction, orbital station design, and inexplicably ancient cathedral architecture. The result looked like a geodesic fever dream, but simulation models suggested it could withstand conditions that would pulp most modern spacecraft. The agricultural domes had been moved underground, carved into bedrock and fitted with recycling systems so efficient they bordered on perpetual motion machines. Impossible, of course. Thermodynamics remained unimpressed by human determination, but the colonists had gotten close enough that the Galactic Agricultural Council had requested their documentation for study. Water reclamation approached 98% efficiency. Atmospheric processors, originally designed to gently encourage Zelthara 9's air toward breathability, had been weaponized into filtration systems that could extract oxygen from damn near anything. The engineering teams had stopped calling them processors and started calling them atmospheric alchemists. You know what I realized? Darius's voice interrupted her reading. This whole situation is basically camping. Camping. Extreme camping. The planet's the wilderness. Our domes are tents, and instead of mosquitoes, we've got corrosive atmosphere and tectonic instability. But camping usually doesn't involve lethal radiation, Dar. Depends where you camp. Kimber laughed, despite herself. The sound felt good inside her helmet. Human, warm, defiant. She pulled up the morale reports Voss had mentioned. The data made no sense. Anxiety levels, moderate but stable. Depression markers, actually down from 3 months ago. Social cohesion indices, climbing steadily. Satisfaction surveys showed 83% of colonists rated their quality of life as acceptable or better, with a notable subset rating it as surprisingly good, all things considered. By every psychological model, the colony should have been a nightmare of panic and despair. Instead, people were thriving. Dr. Yale Corinth, the colony's chief psychologist, had included a note in the latest report. I've stopped trying to explain this with conventional models. Human psychology apparently includes a, oh yeah, watch this response to existential threats that isn't documented in the literature. We're writing papers. Multiple papers. So many papers. Site 47's worse than I thought, Darius reported. The whole sensor array's just gone. Ground swallowed it. Gone. Like into a fresh fissure gone. I'm looking down a crack that's gotta be 70 meters deep and I can see magma at the bottom. It's very orange, aggressively orange. Kimber called up the seismic charts. The fissure hadn't been there yesterday. Zelthara 9 was literally tearing itself apart beneath their feet and accelerating. Mark it as a geological hazard and get clear, she instructed. We'll reroute the transit paths. Already backing away. The magma's looking at me funny. She filed the incident report and pulled up the colony-wide communication board. Someone had posted a meme, a picture of the Environmental Threat Index's catastrophic rating alongside a photo of last night's dessert service in the main cafeteria. Actual chocolate cake somehow made from synthesized ingredients and sheer bloody-mindedness. The caption read, "Threat level catastrophic. Cake quality also catastrophic. But like in a good way." 300 people had commented. Nobody seemed particularly worried about the planet trying to kill them. Kimber's suit alarms chimed softly. Background radiation had ticked up another notch. She made a note to spend extra time in the decontamination cycle and checked her chronometer. Time for the morning briefing at New Perseverance. The transit pod ride back to the main colony took 20 minutes across terrain that looked like abstract art created by violence. The reinforced track wound between steaming fissures and toxic lakes, through canyons carved by wind that could strip paint from metal under overpasses built to shield against rockfall from increasingly unstable cliff faces. The pod itself was a human engineering compromise, fast enough to minimize exposure time, armored enough to survive most environmental hazards, and decorated inside with someone's hand-painted murals of Earth landscapes, forests, mountains, oceans, places most colonists had never actually seen but maintained as cultural memory. Through the pod's narrow windows, Kember watched Zelthara 9's tortured landscape scroll past. The early morning light, if morning meant anything on a planet with 28-hour rotations, turned the toxic clouds shades of amber and rust. Lightning illuminated formations that looked like cathedrals built by drunken giants. Horrible, deadly, undeniably spectacular. New Perseverance emerged from the haze like a mechanical barnacle clinging to stone. The colony's main dome had grown since Kember first arrived, not outward, but denser, reinforced and rebuilt until the structure resembled a fortress more than a settlement. Auxiliary domes clustered around it like offspring, connected by reinforced tunnels that could seal independently if any section failed. The architectural style was what Kember privately called aggressive practicality. Nothing existed for aesthetics, but the cumulative effect of purely functional human engineering had its own beauty. Every strut, every panel, every seal existed because someone had calculated its necessity for survival. The colony looked like what it was, a declaration that humanity would not be moved. The transit pod docked with a pressurization hiss. Kember cycled through 3 separate airlocks, each one scanning her suit for contamination and damage. The decontamination protocols were tedious but necessary. Zelthara 9 wanted inside. The colonist refused to let it in. Director Tanith Voss stood at the head of the briefing room looking exactly like someone who'd slept 4 hours in the past 2 days and considered that luxurious. Her silver hair, cut military short, stuck up at angles that suggested a recent argument with her pillow, but her eyes remained sharp, measuring, calculating. "Right," she said as the last department heads filed in. "Let's discuss how thoroughly screwed we are and, more importantly, what we're doing about it." The briefing room occupied the heart of New Perseverance's main dome, deliberately positioned in the safest location the colonists could engineer. The walls were lined with displays showing environmental data, resource management, structural integrity, 1,000 different metrics, all screaming variations of imminent disaster. Around the conference table sat 20 people representing every aspect of colony operation. Admiral recognized most Jarek Venn from hydroponics, looking perpetually surprised that his plants were still alive. Sarai Oxton from engineering, whose solution to every problem was more struts obviously. Marcus Thade from medical, who'd somehow maintained enough pharmaceutical supplies to keep 14,000 people healthy on a planet actively hostile to biological life. Seismic update first, Voss continued, pulling up a 3-dimensional model of Zelthara 9's tectonic structure. Jarek stood, his lanky frame unfolding like a carpenter's ruler, continental shelves fracturing faster than projected. "We've revised timeline from 14 months to maybe 10 before major breakup begins." Murmurs around the table. Not panic, humans apparently didn't do panic anymore, but concerned calculation. "Define major breakup," Sarai asked. "The ground we're standing on splits into 3 large pieces, and maybe 40 smaller ones. New ocean forms in the middle. Volcanism increases by estimated 300%. The air becomes," Jarek consulted his notes, "aggressively unsurvivable is how the computer phrased it." "The computer has such a way with words," someone muttered. Voss tapped the table, a gesture that meant focus. "Our options are evacuate, which the GCB keeps offering, or adapt." Show of hands, who votes evacuate? Silence. Kember looked around the table. Not one hand raised. "Right, adaptation it is. Engineering?" Sarai stood, pulling up blueprints that looked like they'd been drawn by someone experiencing a beautiful nightmare. "We go underground. Fully underground. The surface domes are tough, but they won't survive what's coming. We've identified bedrock formations deep enough to avoid the worst seismic activity. We excavate, we build down instead of out, and we turn New Perseverance into a bunker city." "Timeline?" Voss asked. 8 months for primary construction. If we commit every available worker and manufacturing resource. which leaves 2 months buffer before the planet attempts aggressive murder. Tight, but workable. Boss turned to Marcus. Medical implications. Marcus leaned back, fingers steepled. Psychologically, this is somehow the best thing we could do. Give humanity a massive engineering challenge with a firm deadline, and watch morale actually improve. It's like we're biologically programmed to thrive on spite. That got chuckles around the table. Physically, Marcus continued, underground living poses challenges. Vitamin D, circadian rhythm disruption, psychological impact of confinement. But we've researched extensively. Proper lighting, scheduled surface excursions in hardened suits, recreational spaces designed to feel open. We can make it work. Humans lived in caves once. We can do it again, just with better lighting and Wi-Fi. The aliens think we're insane, Jarek observed. The aliens, Voss said dryly, are correct, but that's never stopped us. Kember, what's the survey team's assessment? Kember stood, pulling up her latest data. Zelthara 9 is actively dying. Geologically speaking, everything we knew about its stability was wrong. The planet's core is far more volatile than initial surveys indicated. But she highlighted specific regions on the holomap. There are stable zones, deep bedrock formations that'll survive the breakup. If we position correctly, we can ride this out. Ride out planetary death, Darius said from his seat. As goals go, it's ambitious. We're humans, Sarai replied. Ambitious is our default setting. Voss nodded slowly, absorbing information, calculating probabilities. Kember had learned to recognize that expression. The director running mental simulations, wargaming scenarios, planning 3 steps ahead while appearing merely thoughtful. Here's what we're doing, Voss finally said. Full commitment to subterranean construction. Every department submits resource requirements by tomorrow. We're building something that can survive the unsurvivable. Apparently that's what we do now. Question? Just one, Marcus said. Why? Everyone turned to look at him. No, seriously, the doctor continued. The GCB's offer is generous. 17 species willing to help. We could leave, rebuild somewhere stable, avoid the whole planet trying to kill us situation. Why are we staying? Silence filled the briefing room. Kember saw people exchange glances, not uncomfortable but considering. It was a fair question, and one that probably needed asking. Voss stood quietly for a moment, then gestured at the displays surrounding them. Because this is ours. Because we came here with dreams and hopes and ridiculous optimism. Because humanity has never been good at giving up, even when, especially when, giving up makes sense. Because somewhere in our evolutionary history, we developed this absolutely stupid reflex, where impossible odds just make us dig in harder. She paused, looking at each person in turn. Because if we leave, we're admitting that humans belong only where it's safe and easy. And that's never been true. Our ancestors crossed oceans on wooden boats, survived ice ages in caves, built cities in deserts and jungles and on tectonic boundaries. We looked at the universe and said we'll take the hard parts too. Plus, Sarai added, imagine the GCB's faces when we actually pull this off. Laughter rippled through the room, genuine, warm, edged with that particularly human flavor of defiance. Right, Voss said. Let's build something impossible. Meeting adjourned. Try not to die before lunch. The next 8 months unfolded like a fever dream of engineering determination. The colony transformed from surface settlement to excavation project practically overnight. Mining equipment, originally intended for gentle resource extraction, was repurposed into massive boring machines that chewed through Zelthara 9's bedrock like hungry metal worms. 3 separate tunnel complexes spiraled downward, each one large enough to eventually house thousands. The construction proceeded in shifts. Everyone worked, from administrators to children old enough to safely operate equipment. This wasn't military conscription. It was consensus. Someone had posted a sign above the main excavation entrance. Building Paradise 2. Ender found herself coordinating geological surveys 20 hours a day, mapping safe routes through bedrock, identifying load-bearing formations, calculating stress tolerances. Her workspace had relocated to a cramped office carved directly into stone, lit by work lights that cast dramatic shadows across rough-hewn walls. "It's like working inside a skull," Darius observed during one of his rare visits to the main complex. His survey duties kept him topside, monitoring the planet's death throes, calling out threats before they could surprise the construction teams. "A skull full of very determined humans," Kember replied, reviewing the latest excavation reports. They were ahead of schedule. Somehow, despite Zelthara 9's best efforts to kill them with rockfalls, toxic gas pockets, and surprise magma intrusions, the underground city took shape with mathematical precision and artistic chaos. Main chambers carved into stable formations, connected by tunnels wide enough for vehicle traffic. Hydroponic gardens in caverns where geothermal heat could be carefully channeled. Living quarters designed to feel open despite being surrounded by millions of tons of stone. Water processing facilities positioned near underground aquifers, the ones that weren't sulfuric acid. Anyway, Sarai's engineering teams worked miracles daily. Structural supports that could flex with seismic movement. Ventilation systems that could filter air contaminated by literally anything Zelthara 9 produced. Power generation combining geothermal, fusion reactors, and what Sarai called aggressive efficiency. "We're not building a colony," she explained during one progress briefing. "We're building a generation ship that doesn't move. Everything needs to be renewable, repairable, and redundant. If it can break, we've designed 3 backup systems." Month 4 brought the first major challenge. A previously undetected magma chamber, exactly where they'd planned the eastern residential complex. The discovery threatened to derail the entire construction schedule. The engineering teams looked at the magma chamber, consulted their calculations, and designed around it. Not away from it, around it. They built insulated barriers, channeled the heat into power generation, and turned a catastrophic obstacle into an asset. The eastern complex ended up running on its own geothermal power with enough excess to feed into the main grid. "Humanity's superpower," Yael Corman said during her weekly psychological assessment, "is apparently weaponizing inconveniences." Morale remained inexplicably high. The colony had organized entertainment schedules around construction shifts. Amateur musicians performed in newly carved amphitheaters. A theater group staged an incredibly ambitious production of Macbeth in a chamber designated for future water storage. The irony of performing a tragedy about ambition and downfall while literally digging into a dying planet escaped precisely no one. Month 6 brought worse news. Zelthara 9's deterioration had accelerated again. The timeline had collapsed from 10 months to maybe 7. "We're not going to make it," Jarek said during the emergency briefing, his usual optimism cracking. "There's no way. We needed 8 months. We've got 7, and that's assuming the planet doesn't spring surprises." Voss looked at the assembled department heads. Kember recognized that expression again. Calculation, determination, and something that might have been fury at the universe for poor timing. "Then we work faster," the director said simply. "Double shifts become standard. Every non-essential system gets mothballed to free up power for construction. Entertainment programs pause. Recreational schedules suspend. We have 7 months to do 8 months of work, and we're doing it because the alternative is admitting defeat, and humanity doesn't do that." "That's not sustainable," Marcus protested. "People need rest, need normalcy. People need to survive," Voss interrupted. "We rest after we've built something that won't collapse on our heads." "Any objection?" Silence. Not submission, agreement. The kind of grim determination that came from collective understanding of necessity. "Right, let's move a mountain." The final month was chaos barely contained by competence. Zelthara 9's surface had become actively hostile. Fissures opened daily. The atmosphere had thickened into soup that could dissolve unprotected metal in hours. The temperature variance between day and night had expanded to ranges that would shatter poorly designed equipment. The planet wasn't dying quietly. It was thrashing, violent, desperate. The humans dug faster. Kember spent her days in a pressurized command center halfway between surface and the deepest excavations, coordinating everything. Survey data flooded her screens, seismic warnings, atmospheric readings, structural stress reports. Every few hours brought new crises. A tunnel collapse here, toxic gas intrusion there, unexpected heat bloom somewhere else. The construction teams responded like surgeons performing operation under fire, precisely, efficiently, with gallows humor that would have horrified anyone unfamiliar with human stress responses. Eastern junctions flooded with groundwater, someone reported. Contaminated. Sarai asked. Actually, no, it's clean. We just accidentally found a freshwater aquifer. Call that a win. Pipe it to storage. 2 weeks before deadline, the Western residential complex suffered a major structural failure. A keystone support had fractured under stress, and simulation models predicted cascade collapse within 72 hours. Sarai's team reinforced it in 60. 1 week before deadline, surface sensors detected unusual seismic activity, the kind that predicted imminent large-scale tectonic movement. The kind that meant planet breakup has begun early. Voss made the call. Begin evacuation from surface domes immediately. Ready or not, New Perseverance was going underground. The migration took 4 days of controlled chaos. 14,000 people moving into chambers that were technically finished but definitely not polished. Equipment hauled through tunnels on maglev sleds. Final system checks happening while families moved furniture into raw stone apartments. Kember made the descent on day 3, her last topside survey complete. She'd watched Zelthar A9's death throes through sensor arrays and cameras, documenting the planet's final transformation into geological hell. Her last entry in the survey log. Environmental threat index beyond catastrophic. Human response. Typical. The underground city hummed with activity and life. LED lights designed to simulate daylight brightened massive caverns. Hydroponic gardens already produced vegetables. Children ran through corridors carved from living rock. Someone had installed a public display showing environmental conditions topside. People gathered to watch their planet die, commentary casual, almost affectionate. Look at that lava flow. Beautiful in a terrible way. Think we could have survived up there another week? Not a chance. Yeah, probably not. The final surface dome sealed and disconnected 3 hours before the predicted major tectonic event. Sensors recorded everything. The ground splitting along fracture lines predicted months ago. Magma venting in columns visible from orbit. The continent beginning its centuries-long process of breaking into archipelagos. New Perseverance, buried 3 kilometers down in carefully selected bedrock, barely trembled. Director Kenneth Voss stood in what would eventually be called City Center, an enormous cavern that served as New Perseverance's heart. Around her, 14,000 people gathered for what tradition demanded. A ceremony. A moment of collective acknowledgement. Well, Vine said, her voice amplified through the chamber's acoustic systems, we've officially achieved something monumentally stupid. We looked at a dying planet and decided to ride it out underground like bedrock-dwelling moles with engineering degrees. Laughter echoed through the cavern. The Galactic Coordination Bureau thinks we're insane. 17 different species offered us homes, and we said no thanks, we're good. Future historians are going to have very pointed questions about our decision-making processes. More laughter, but also nods, proud, defiant. But here's what we've proven. Humanity doesn't need perfect conditions. We don't need safety or certainty, or reasonable odds. Give us stone and determination, and we'll carve paradise from bedrock. Give us a dying planet, and we'll burrow into its bones and thrive out of pure spite. Thus paused, looking around the assembled crowd, engineers and farmers, doctors and teachers, parents and children, people who'd chosen impossible over easy. The environmental threat index currently reads catastrophic. No surface survivability. Recommend immediate evacuation. She smiled. Human morale, somehow still high. Welcome to New Perseverance 2. Let's see how long we can make unsurvivable last. The crowd erupted, cheers, applause. That peculiar human sound of triumph over terrible odds. Cumber stood at the edge of the gathering, watching her species celebrate survival. Above them, 3 kilometers of stone, and beyond that, a planet tearing itself apart. Below them, deeper bedrock and eventual geothermal heat death. Around them, other humans, building civilization in the dark because that's what they did. Her species, Kember thought again, was clinically insane. She'd never been prouder to be part of it. The Galactic Coordination Bureau's inspection team arrived at Zelthar A9, expecting to document a disaster. What they found instead confused every predictive model they possessed. 14,000 humans living comfortably 3 kilometers beneath a planet-wide catastrophe, thriving even. The underground city featured parks, schools, theaters, restaurants. People cultivated hobbies, formed communities, reproduced. Someone had installed a public aquarium featuring fish from Earth, maintained with obsessive precision. The GCB team's report concluded. Human survival instinct operates outside conventional parameters. Recommend updating xenopsychology texts, possibly entire fields of study. They've turned unsurvivable into merely unpleasant and appear content with this achievement. Request additional research funding to understand how this is possible. In New Perseverance's deepest chambers, Kember Thrace filed her latest survey reports. Zelthara 9 would continue deteriorating for centuries. The humans would continue adapting, because that's what they did. Environmental Threat Index, still catastrophic. Human morale, still inexplicably